Hello to all of the brothers and sisters of the Templar Collegia. My name is John Logan Parsons III. I am the class master for the Templar Collegia, Northern California region. I am pleased to say we have Maciel joining us today on Voices from the Temple. Michael was ordained as a priest in a Christian mystical order called the Holy Order of Mans in 1972. The Holy Order of Mans is a teaching and service order that derives its teachings from Rosicrucianism, tarot, the basic sciences, the core elements of yoga, and the essential truths of all of the world's major religions. Maciel is also the author of two amazing books, both of which I own and have become some of my favorites. The first is titled The Five Vows. The second is called World Priest. If you are not familiar with his books, I highly suggest you pick up your own copy of either one of his books. You won't be disappointed. I'm extremely excited to have Michael as our guest today. I am also deeply honored to have him as a friend and a spiritual teacher. So without further ado, how you doing, Michael?
Hi, John. I'm doing fine. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's a real
really
honor.
A pleasure.
Yeah, so first I wanted to kind of ask you a little bit about the Holy Order of Mans. If you could give some of our listeners a little bit more information on that, or what it is exactly, or what it was.
Sure, I'd be happy to. The Holy Order of Mans was a holy order founded in 1968 by Earl W. Blyton, who was a spiritual teacher at the time, and who came out of the Rosicrucian tradition, but also had extensive training in Hinduism. He was a Christian master in much the same way you would think of a Hindu master or a yogi master. He was capable of bringing people into the light of illumination and also into self-realization. And he did it in accordance with some time-honored initiations, methods that have been passed down through thousands of years. The order was also a service order, in that we believe that the path to spiritual realization lays in giving of oneself in service to others in a way that precludes any thought of self. In other words, selfless service. So that as you give, you receive. And you receive in ways that are unpredictable and in ways that are most beneficial to you spiritually. Because the more we get out of ourselves, the more we are able to get in touch with our true inner being, or what we call the self, with the capital S. So the order was structured much the same way as a Catholic monastery, although it was co-ed, but we lived communally and under very strict rule. And we had communion every morning. We had meditation every night, prayers. We practiced spiritual exercises such as concentration exercises and illumination exercises. And we also did a lot of community work, we had a presence on the streets of most of the major cities in the United States, and then eventually we were in Europe and also in Central America. So it was quite an extensive organization, but it did fall apart once the founder died. There was no longer that cohesive leadership. And as is the way of so many organizations, internal strife, political problems, competition of egos set in, and the organization fell apart.
Yeah, that seems to be
since that time
kind of a common factor in a lot of esoteric orders. So
it almost, it's as predictable as rain. So that's, but there have been groups of us who have started our own, not so much organizations, but just communities where we've we've stayed together, and we've not living communally. Everybody has gone their own way and had their own lives, but we do stay active, and we do keep the teachings alive, and we each have found our own path of service. So that's where we are today. And what else do you need to know?
Well, I mean, it seems as though you're still actively perpetuating what you were taught in that order. Still to this day, you're still, keeping the tenets alive. Is that safe to say?
Right. Yes. I've always thought that it's important to reiterate the teachings, to keep them alive. Otherwise, they become dead. If all we have as a resource are the writings and teachings of people who lived last century or before, then eventually it's going to just die off. So I've always thought that we need to keep it alive, that each generation that comes forth has to not only memorize or even be able to paraphrase the teachings, but they have to be able to generate the teachings. In other words, to speak them authentically from not just their knowledge, but from their experience.
Right.
And you can always tell someone who when they speak, if they're doing so from experience or if they've just familiarized themselves with a particular doctrine.
That's right. And
that's how I try to approach it, and I try to help other people find their authentic voice and to be able to speak the truth from where they are.
That's great. That's kind of sort of what it's all about, being a Templar, a modern day Templar, is perpetuating those teachings, and kind of exactly what you just said, sort of modernizing them and being able to, spin them in such a way that, people in our day can still grasp, what we're trying to get across.
Right. And as we, it's not like even doing it consciously. It's really getting in touch with the experience within oneself, and then just speaking it, talking about it, and you can't help but speak it in your vernacular, in the vernacular of the day. So it communicates. If it's genuine, it communicates. If it's read by rote, it doesn't.
So how did you first become interested in studying esotericism?
Well, it's hard to say. It's always been a part of my life. Although when I was younger, as a kid, I couldn't really articulate what I was experiencing or seeing and feeling. But I felt it deeply. I grew up in desert town at the foot of the Sierra Nevadas, and so I spent a lot of time in the mountains and out in the desert, a lot of times alone for days at a time, just camping and hiking and skiing, just being in the magnificence of nature. And I think that it either opened it up in me or resonated in me. If you know what I mean. It wasn't like it created something in me, but it definitely woke me up to the reality of something much larger than myself.
Yes.
And at a very early age, I dedicated myself to that, and then I was just naturally guided to the right places and the right people.
So being alone in that type of environment kind of gave you it was like a catalyst for you to sort of go within and kind of remember some things.
Yes. I would say it helped me to get in touch with a kind of fundamental vibration that the whole earth speaks, that it was simultaneously an inner and an outer experience.
That's great.
Being in nature can do that for a person.
Yeah, I feel like it's sort of there's a lack of that now, right? Within our culture especially, like there's a real lack of being in touch with nature, and I feel like that's kind of created a sickness within us almost. What do you think?
I believe that. Yeah, I think you're right. I think that especially with the advent of computer and online, the way we spend so much time online, it separates us even more. In some ways, it's good that because we're getting in touch with another aspect of nature, which is connectedness. I think that the online activity really connects people, and so that's a different dimension. But it is still important that we get out in nature, that we put all of that aside and really open up just to the presence of the natural order. And when so many people talk about nature, it's as though they're talking about the earth, just the earth and the planet itself, the biosphere. And when I say nature, I mean not only that, but the cosmos. When you just stopping and considering where we are on this planet, traveling through space in a vast, bottomless openness, it's almost too much.
Yeah, it's kind of frightening.
The fragility of our position is enormous.
Good use of vocabulary there.
So that's what I mean by nature. It's not just the rocks, the trees, and the flowers, and the valleys. It's the sun. It's the moon. It's all of the stars and this great being in which we live.
It's beautiful. So, how did you become involved in the Templar Collegia?
Well, through you, John. I think you you contacted me on Facebook. Isn't that how it worked out?
Yeah. I think we kind of sort of moved from one thing to another sort of together. And I remember meeting you for the first time. We met over coffee, and I just was just amazed with your book, and just it's always been really, you're always such a great conversationalist, and I just really appreciate you, Michael.
Well, thanks, John. I'm really glad that we got together and that I got to become a member of the group.
Yeah, well, we're really lucky to have you. So, I wanted to ask a little bit about what spiritual or religious traditions or practices do you feel the most drawn to?
Well, I feel quite naturally drawn to Christian mysticism. Mainstream Christianity doesn't do a whole lot for me, except in that it has all of the teachings there, but they usually take them too literally, and whereas Christian mysticism is more practice oriented and going within to find the truth of the teachings and not just the academic facts of them. So, but I'm also very interested in Buddhism, not as a study, but I really appreciate their approach, and I have had the privilege of meeting some genuine Buddhist teachers, and I have loved the 𝗹𝗵 for many years and feel a resonance with that, as well as the teachings of Hinduism, and I've known some genuine Hindu masters as well. So I have a rather broad exposure to the teachings, but I have a natural affinity for Christianity because I feel like I've spent many lives in that tradition, and even in this life, having gone through Catholic school as a kid, and being exposed at a very early age to the rituals and the sacraments, and of course, regardless of the kind of ritual a young person is exposed to, if it's real, it's going to resonate, because there's that element of sacredness to it. It's the connection with that, again, that which is greater, with the great being.
It sounds like you got your cat in the background meowing.
It's not my cat. It's the neighbor's cat. But I've taken to feeding it, and the poor thing's starving to death. So,
no.
But he's going to have to wait.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, I kind of I agree with what you're saying about it. Doesn't really matter the vehicle as long as it gets you to where you're going. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, and as with any ritual, and it can be a simple ritual such as blessing your food before you eat. I mean, that's a ritual, right? There's a real action that takes place, but also there's it's a stop in the flow of time, and it's a stepping up into a higher order, so to speak. So you step out of mundane consciousness into spiritual consciousness at specific times and specific places, and that speaks to the soul. And I think that that's sorely missing in today's society. And I think that's why there's such an interest in things like Masonry, because or any organization or group that uses sacred ritual at its core, because people are hungry for that. They're soul hungry.
Yeah, I agree completely. If I mean, we spoke a little bit about spiritual and religious traditions that you feel the most drawn to. I'm also curious, if you could name one book, one or two, I guess, if you could name one book that had the most impact on your spiritual quest, what would that be and why?
Well, I think the first books that I came across as a teenager were the books by Alan Watts, and there was another one, The Art of Loving, by a psychologist. Name escapes me at the moment. But I'd have to say, if I had to leave in a hurry and could only take one book, it would be the Bible. And I know that sounds trite, but it's really true. And I think that having gone to Catholic school, I knew almost nothing about the Bible, because they don't teach you the Bible in Catholic school.
Isn't that ironic?
They teach you some of the stories. It is. You get lots of catechism, almost no Bible. But in the Holy Order of Mans, as a student, in my early training, one of the first things they had us do was to write out the New Testament by hand. We had to do two chapters a day.
Wow.
Yeah, and that was on top of an already very busy schedule. And each chapter, first we just had to paraphrase the chapter and do it on one side of a sheet of paper. Just paraphrase what the chapter said. And then on the other side of the piece of paper, we had to write what we thought about that.
That's intense.
So we did that all the way we did, I think, the first chapter of Genesis and then all of the New Testament, but not Revelation because it's too symbolic. But what it did was it did a couple of things. Number one, it familiarized us with the Bible in a way that no other method could. But it also helped us distinguish between what it says and what we thought it said. So on the first part of the page, we had to paraphrase what it said without interjecting any opinion about it. And on the other side, we had to write our opinion about it. So by the time we got done, it really taught us how to distinguish between, the thing itself and what we thought of it. So I find that really enamored me to the Bible, because it showed me the depth of it.
Do you feel like
it's an extraordinary, sophisticated document?
Absolutely. Do you feel like it, utilizing that exercise of writing it and kind of, letting it tell you the story as opposed to you trying to tell it what it is, what it is? Do you feel like
right? Yeah, good way to put it.
Do you feel like you've applied that, to other teachings and things of that nature, like, through your experience, or is that something that was kind of only in the Holy Order of Mans at that time?
No, I think once you do a practice like that, it sticks with you your whole life. And you always and there's always the temptation to take things too literally, and that's a real danger. But there's also a temptation to overinterpret a sacred text. You have to simultaneously read it for what it's saying, but also to understand the layers of meaning. And those layers have to correspond. There has to be points of connection. If you're going to interpret a sacred piece of writing on one level, it better correspond to the other levels you're interpreting it on as well. Otherwise, you run the risk of getting off on a tangent.
Yeah, well,
kind of superimposing your own ideas.
I think that's really, really great kind of practical advice for anybody who's on this path. So I really, really appreciate your insight on that.
Yeah, you bet.
So what is there a person that you admire, living or deceased, that you truly admire as a spiritual teacher, and why?
Well, I'd have to say it was my own teacher in the Holy Order of Mans. We called him Father Paul, and he was an older man, older than just about all the rest of us. But he was 𝗵𝗶𝘃𝗃, the founder, and he was truly a master teacher. He was also a retired electrical engineer, so many of the teachings were given through his knowledge of science, which he had a saying, said if something is spiritually correct, it must also be scientifically correct.
Interesting.
And vice versa. So we talked about prayer, for instance, in terms of how power, force, and energy moves, and in terms of how the mind is universal, and how what we speak becomes reality, and how that happens in terms of physics. So everything that I learned from him, aside from my immediate experience of the power that he carried, was to learn how to see the teachings in a scientific way, and not to reduce them, the way that science tends to do, but to just simply recognize that these things we talk about when we talk about spiritual things are real. I think that's the main point. They're real. There are real energies at work in them. And to understand how energy works is the same whether you're looking at something, spiritual, or you're looking at something physical.
Well,
there are great analogies between electricity, for instance, and the way prayer works.
Yeah, I was curious if I've heard you in the past speak a little bit about that, and it's always been a very, very clear and vivid way of describing things, using electricity or lightning, as a way to describe energy moving, you've always had a good way of expressing that, those types of teachings in that way. And it sounds like you kind of got that from this mentor, Father Paul. And I would be really curious to know, is there, where could someone go if they wanted to learn more about this Father Paul, or do these teachings exist somewhere in a text, or,
Well, there are some things online, but there are not really a lot of resources in that. He died in 1974, so there are some books that were published through the Holy Order of Mans, but they're kind of hard to find. And so that, if somebody wants to get a sense of what that order taught, I would recommend reading my books, because I feel like I've stayed pretty true to the original teachings, although I don't claim to, to be representing the order, but what I learned in the order is condensed in those books. So I would have to recommend that. There just isn't a lot in the written record of what he taught, as is true with a lot of bona fide master teachers in all traditions. They don't leave a lot behind. They just leave a lot of students who then go on to speak in their own voice what they learned. I feel that's what I'm doing.
It seems to me that would be more important anyways, really. Like the legacy they're leaving behind is this wisdom that's being perpetuated, as opposed to just sitting on a bookshelf somewhere, collecting dust, right?
Right. It has to be continually spoken through living person in order to live.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that's, hopefully that's part of what we're doing as a collective within the Templar Collegia, just continuing that perpetuation and, making it a living, active tradition as opposed to a passive thing. And,
yeah,
I want to...
I think it's important to, if I may, I think it's important to really identify what those teachings are, and to always circle back to them and tie them into, whatever is being discussed. Otherwise, group meetings can become like a free-for-all or just a soapbox for anybody who walks in the door.
That's right.
Yeah. And so it's important to really clearly identify what the core teachings are, and to keep coming back to them.
Yeah, I agree, and I feel like the Templar Collegia study materials, the text that just was released recently called the 𝗀𝗶𝘃 secretum is just that. You know what I mean? It's super. It's like a foundational thing, and it's really easy to kind of go back to basics with that. You know what I mean? It kind of brings you back home. So I think we're on a good path right now. So I'm really excited.
Yeah, I look forward to receiving my copy.
Yes, you will soon. And so I mean, a lot of this work, we definitely throughout our lives we experience challenges, and I'm just curious, have you experienced any challenges in your life that have contributed to your spiritual growth?
Sure. I know some people, face some pretty severe challenges, either health challenges or money problems or relationship problems, things that really seem to get in the way. I've been lucky not to have any health problems or especially economic problems. But I think my challenges have been mostly psychological, in that I've had a belief for a long time that I just don't have enough education, which I think is evidence of a deep-seated belief that somehow I'm stupid or not as smart as other people. And that plagued me for a long time. I didn't get as much schooling as I wished that I had. And so, I've had to learn a lot of what I know through my own study and through my own practice. But a challenge such as that has worked really well for me, in that eventually I saw that people who I regarded as being really, really smart could also be incredibly stupid. And it disabused me of this notion of thinking that I was somehow inferior intellectually to these people, and which is doesn't make me superior by any means, but it took away the stigma, the self-inflicted stigma of feeling less than, and it freed me up, I think, to speak and to live in the world with every bit as much right as anybody else. Now, it doesn't mean, that we live in Silicon Valley, and I meet a lot of people here, and I think the median IQ in this part of the world is probably one of the highest I mean, there are a lot of smart, very, very intelligent and talented people here. But what I've learned is that a person can be talented and intelligent in a particular domain, but be just as ignorant of spiritual matters and other areas of life, not just spiritual, but like family matters and just relationship matters, as anybody else. So this idea that you have to be smart in order to be spiritual, I've always gone out of my way to disprove that. That some people think that you can only get into heaven, so to speak, if you're really intelligent, and nothing could be farther from the truth. In fact, it can in many ways, and most often, knowing a lot can be an impediment to one's spiritual growth.
Interesting.
Because the more you know, the harder it is to let go of what you know. And some of the smartest people who have ever lived have said, a paraphrase, that the more I know, the more I know that I don't know. And that's really the meaning of humility. And humility is the one thing that if you do not have that, you cannot grow spiritually. Because if you think you know the truth, you are no longer in a position to receive the truth, because the truth is always bigger than you are. And the more you advance toward it, the bigger it becomes. In other words, you set up a goal and you move towards your goal, and the closer you get to it, you begin to realize that the goal you thought was your goal is no longer sufficient, that your goal grows as you approach it. And sometimes it can change your trajectory, and you have to make a course adjustment as you grow.
Yeah, that is really, really profound. I consider you probably one of the smartest people I've ever met. So I'm kind of surprised that you, have had those sort of challenges or internal challenges, because you definitely come off as being extremely intelligent. So I wonder, what advice would you give to a fellow Templar sister or brother who might be facing the same types of challenges?
Well, I would say that study is really important, and to always remain open to opposing ideas. In other words, don't be afraid to listen to the skeptics. Don't be afraid to speak your understanding in public, because you never know when you're fooling yourself. And if you say something, if you say something that really is delusional, you can count on somebody setting you straight, and that's important. Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, so that's what I would say is I have a book. Forget the name of it, but it's a big book, and it comes from the 90s. I think it was written sometime in the 90s, but it was a book written by a skeptic.
Way back in the 90s.
Yeah,
right?
way back in the 90s, and it's a skeptical take on all of the New Age. And I swear, I learned more about different ideas of the New Age from that book than from people who are preaching those ideas. So sometimes you can learn more about what's really important to you by what your skeptics are saying than you can by listening to people who agree with you. In other words, they can sometimes state your case better than you can. They just do it in a negative way.
Well, that's a really, really great perspective to take, and I think that's some really, really good advice for people that might be facing the same types of challenges. And I really appreciate your insight on that. That's really great.
Well, the criticism today is that people are in bubbles. You get in your own bubble and it becomes self-reinforcing. So whatever track you're on just gets more and more locked in and until you become incapable of thinking in any other way. And in order to really grow spiritually, you have to continually break that barrier. You have to burst the bubble and reach outside of it and see what other people are thinking and saying and doing. Not only to check yourself to make sure that you're on track, but to perhaps find something that you can use. Because the more you get locked into your own way of thinking, the more limited you become. It's not to say you have to be open to anything, not by any means, but you have to be aware of what the critics are saying about what you believe. I think that's very important.
I totally agree. So, what, in your own view, what does a modern day Knight Templar look like? What does it mean to be a modern day Knight Templar?
Well, I think that's yet to be seen, don't you? I mean, it's relatively new, as far as I can tell. So that's kind of like up to all the members to create.
That's a good point.
Yeah, that's why I think that the core teachings need to be pretty clear, and not to turn them into a dogma or a doctrine, but just basic principles by which people live their lives, and those have been articulated pretty well, I think, through Masonry and through the Martinists and these other groups, Rosicrucians.
Yeah,
I mean, it's all part of the Western tradition, right?
That's right. Yep.
And we espouse the importance of the individual and individual responsibility, and the importance of conscience and living according to conscience, and of stepping outside of the group and walking the path under one's own power and not identifying too much with the group or the state or the religion, regardless of what the group, how it's put together. The Western tradition is about the individual traveling, venturing into the unknown.
It's kind of like,
and discovering.
It's like being like a wise rebel.
Yeah, but the purpose is not just to be rebellious. The purpose is to step outside of your culture, your inner and outer enculturation, and really discover who you are in relation to the cosmos. And you can't do that. Nobody can do that for you, and you can't do it on the coattails of somebody else. In other words, you have to actually go through the experiences yourself. You can't just, rely on the experiences of others and just simply believe, by virtue of what they've gone through. You have to go through them yourself.
That's why you can't. Somebody can't be initiated. You can't. Be initiated for you. You know what I mean? It's something you personally have to go through.
Yeah, you personally have to go through, and you can't tell a person what decision to make. A person's, and you can't even set it up to where that person knows what is expected of him. In other words, spiritual growth comes when you make a decision when you don't know which way to go, but you have to decide, and you can't ask somebody which or what should I do. You can't even ask God, what should I do? You have to act on your best inner understanding of the direction you take, and whether that direction is right or wrong, if it turns out or if it doesn't turn out, you will learn through that, and that's how growth actually takes place. No one ever grows by being obedient to what somebody else says, and that's essentially what the Western path is about. It's about the path. It's a path of responsibility and accountability. And the only way that can be done is if you make your own choices and you take the responsibility for those choices and the consequences of those choices. So it's a very daring and an adventurous path. It's not. This is not a group. This is not something you get by belonging to a group. This is really like a mystic, I forget who it was, said it's the path of the alone to the alone. And that is profoundly the truth of the path we're on. So no one can make your decisions for you.
It's like Manly Palmer Hall used to say something like, freedom is a responsibility. Like people today have kind of forgotten that it's, it takes work. It's a responsibility.
Oh yeah, yeah.
It's the same idea.
And the way you get out of that responsibility is to say that nothing matters. Right? There is no universal truth.
Oh man.
There's nothing real about God. There's nothing larger than ourselves. We make it all up. And if you say that, it alleviates you the responsibility to make choices in your life.
It's like the easy way out, right?
It's an easy way out. Well, it comes with some pretty dire consequences in and of itself, because eventually your life falls apart if you follow that path.
Yeah, I agree.
It's like in the old apprenticeship program. You have to do it the way that the master does it. You have to learn how he or she does it before you can strike out on your own. The teacher says, do it my way until you have proven that you can do it my way. Then you can make your own adaptations. And that's something that people, it seems to fly in the face of this idea of being an individual, but it really doesn't. Because you bear the responsibility still. But unless you're willing to submit to a pretty rigorous program of spiritual development, there's no way you're going to break out of the shell that your culture and your religion and your society has automatically placed you in. So there's rigor involved, there's discipline that's involved, and you have to be able to do these or fulfill these requirements of spiritual growth relentlessly. You can't say, well, I don't feel like it today. It's just like being an athlete. An athlete can't say, I don't feel like working out. I mean, that's just not what you do. So you have to approach your spiritual development work in the same way.
Right, so
otherwise you're just fooling yourself.
Yeah,
right?
It's very active. It's an active.
Yeah, and then once you've done that, then you can emerge as a true individual, not just somebody who's caught up in the glamour of their own egotism.
Right. Very good, man. That's really, really, really deep stuff, and I really enjoy your insight on all of these things. It's just amazing.
Great.
What would you say is your personal quest as a Templar?
Well, I desire to be of service in any way that I can, and as far as a quest goes, I would like to see this group grow in its influence and provide what's lacking, which as I said before, this sense of the sacred and the sense of growing up. I mean, that's something that is hard. It's hard to develop spiritually because it involves growing up, and growing up means letting go of dependency, of like always following a teacher,
yeah,
who's and deferring responsibility onto one's teacher is really a mistake. And any teacher that demands that of you, who personally demands devotion to them, you want to get away from that person.
Right.
Because that's not what spiritual teaching is about.
Then it becomes like a cult of personality.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. And there are a lot of sociopaths out
yes,
there who thrive in that environment.
Especially in government. But, I hear a lot of people, and I read a lot about people, expressing this idea that you must be as a child and you need to kind of unlearn and go back to being innocent as a part of the process. of the spiritual work we do. And it's refreshing to hear somebody, what you just said, talking about the other aspect of that is growing up. It's a balance of both of those things. It's not one or the other, but we tend to be more heavy on you need to be childlike and open and things like that, but you don't really hear too much about it's a responsibility and it's about, metaphorically being an adult. So I really appreciate that outlook on it. It's very refreshing. So, if you could eradicate one problem or issue facing our world today, Michael, what would it be?
Well, I think it's important always to look at problems in the world and try to get underneath them. Where do they come from? Because the outward manifestation of that show up as world problems always have an underlying cause. And I would say that it's not merely my opinion, but a lot of people have said this, that the underlying cause for most, if not all, of the world's problems is fear. And one of the ways that fear shows up is that, there are a lot of things we can be afraid of, but down deep, really down inside, as some people have said, what we're really afraid of is God. That we're afraid of being punished. We're constantly in fear of having all of our karmic buildup collapse on us in one heap and being obliterated by that. That could be. That could be. The other thing too that we're afraid of is that we're going to die. Yeah. That nobody gets out of here alive. That it's like in the movie The Terminator, right? It will not stop until it gets you, and life is like that, right?
Yeah.
Something's going to get you in the end, and it's not going to be pretty. That's just the way it is.
Yeah, that's right.
And the secret to living a happy, fulfilled life is coming to grips with that and being okay with that. Like that's just it's not like, and not to take it personally. I think that you look at guys, especially when they reach their midlife crisis. It's their fear of death that makes them go out and want to be a teenager again. And countries act the same way. Governments act the same way. They begin to lose their sense of their vitality and their youth, and then they seek to dominate as many people as they can. They start to get pathological in their approach to what they do, and it's all based on fear. So, in whatever ways we can find to alleviate fear, I think that's how we turn things around.
So, how in your opinion, could we, as Templars, collectively or individually, work to address this issue or problem of fear?
Well, St. Paul says in the Bible, perfect love casts out all fear. So we need to really develop the capability of loving. We have to be able to open up and love, not just other people, but to love the world. And that means, and that's not an intellectual thing. That's literally opening up your heart and being thrilled to be alive. So, it's surprising how many people fear life itself, because it's like the Terminator, it's going to get you.
It's funny you keep mentioning the Terminator, and I literally, my wife Tiffany and I have been watching like all of the Terminator movies like for the last 2 days. So it's kind of funny, like kind of weird.
There you go.
Yeah.
Well, it's huge. I've known people who've watched those movies like dozens of times.
Yeah.
And they don't know why, but the reason they're so compelling is because there's some real symbolism there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
It resonates on a very deep level, and so.
Yeah, I really.
Yeah.
No, I was gonna say I really that's something else that I really enjoy about you, Michael, is your ability to utilize, you kind of critique these movies in such a way, and you have a really great way of finding the metaphors in all of these films and popular culture. And like I said, if our listeners ever get a chance, they should check out Michael's blog, and it's The Mystical Christ.
𝗪sticalchrist.org.
Yeah, it's a really, really, really great blog, and there's a lot of good papers on there, about certain films and stuff. I think one of them that was really cool was Snow White and the Huntsman.
Yeah, Snow White and the Huntsman is one of my favorites.
Yeah, that was a really, really cool one. So you have a real good knack for that.
Well, in the top toolbar, you'll see the tab that says movies, and it's a lot of fun. I have a lot of fun writing them.
So great. So we've talked a little bit about some of the, problems you feel are facing our world today, and one of them is fear. And I'm talking about how we as Templars can collectively or individually work to address this issue by being open to love, right? And I also want to ask you, in your opinion, what is the most positive aspect about our world today?
Well, there certainly is a lot. If you want to get a sense of that, just go to TED.com and listen to some of the people who are all fired up in their own areas of creativity and innovation. Simultaneous, the world has such severe and enormous problems that it's calling forth the best of humanity's creativity. So it's like the worst conditions always bring out the best in us if we're willing to open up to the experience. So these problems with climate change and the political problems and the way cities are growing, just sprawling and almost impossible to live in, all of these are bringing out the ideas of how to make these things better. And that's almost like, you could say that's why we're here. And we need these problems to crack open, the full spectrum of our potential. So it's a great time to be alive because the problems are great.
Right, because it gives you something to work on. So that's what I would say
is, yeah, and nothing is as enticing as an impossible problem. We're doing things now that just a century ago would seem like magic.
That's right.
Or miraculous. Things that we couldn't even imagine. And, somebody has said recently that the future, they talk about the death of the future, because the future is happening so fast that it's no longer there. The future is behind us. We're beyond the future now. Things are happening so quickly that we are beyond the future.
Right.
So
it's like that scene in The Lion King when the baboon hits the little lion on the head with a stick, and the lion gets all mad at him, and the baboon says, "What? It's in the past." Kind of funny.
Little Zen story there. Yeah.
So how can we as Templars support this and encourage this? Encourage this positive aspect that you see in the world today.
Well, everybody, we all have our own area, our jobs and our participation in the communities that we live. And I think that's the most important thing, is to be active and to speak your truth, not to be afraid to speak up and not just against something, but really for, the positive. But you have to do both, really. You have to, when something's not right, you have to say it's not right. But then, you have to also say, this is what we need to do instead, and to create a vision that people can rally around. So it's in our involvement in the world. And then as a group, the group is like a sanctuary where people of like mind can get together and support each other. But you never want to let the group collapse in on itself and become insular. When that happens, groups die. They will peter out, because unless a group is outwardly focused in each member's activity in the world, it's not going to last for long.
That's right. Yeah, we talk a lot about being, it's easy to be spiritual in a temple, right? The idea of being a modern Templar is that you're engaged with the world. You're going out and you're practicing in the world. Like it's easy to be spiritual in that environment, but going to work and dealing with everyday problems and things of that nature, that's when the true growth really happens, and that's where you make a difference in the world as well, right? It's not, it's good to pray and meditate and things of that nature, but it's also good to go out and engage with the world, because that's where these lessons are presented to you, and that's when you truly find your path.
Yes, that's right. And working, takes up a huge amount of our time, usually 40 hours at least, and sometimes much more. So unless you can be alive at work, you're wasting a lot of your vital energy. There's a good book, I just ran across it today. It's called Fearless at Work. Timeless Teachings for Awakening Confidence, Resilience, and Creativity in the Face of Life's Demands. And it's by a man named Maciel Carroll, Carroll, and it's published by Shambhala. And I haven't read it, but it looks really good. I read a review on it, and it looks like it's talking exactly about what we're talking about now. And this guy's a Buddhist, so he's coming at it from a real kind of non-sectarian angle.
Well, that's a great suggestion.
Yeah, we have to. Yeah, it's called Fearless at Work, and we have to be able to find ways to be alive while we're at work, and to really invest and transmute, the act of working, and make it holy. Because that's where most of our energy goes. So if we're not doing it there, we're not doing it. You can't just be spiritual in the temple, as you said.
That's right. So, man, this has been a really, really great interview, and I've really learned a lot from you. And I always, I want to reiterate that you're just such an amazing source of information, and you have a really, really cool way of presenting these very deep truths in a simple way. And it's just such a blessing to have you as a friend and as a member of the Templar Collegia. And I want to reiterate to our listeners that they really should pick up one of Michael's books. There's one called The 5 Vows, which is very good, and then a newer one called World Priest, which is also very, very good. And I wanted to is there any last thoughts that you want to give to the membership before we part ways?
Yeah, I would just say that being a member of the Templars is a good thing. It's very much in its formation. That's the sense that I get of it, anyway. That here's an opportunity to create something in the world that could be a very positive force, and the more cohesive it is, and by that I mean how true it is to itself, how true to you are to yourself, and how supportive you are of your brothers and sisters. That's going to determine just how much of an influence it will be. And we all know that we need strong positive influence, and this particular group is drawing on the wisdom of the Western tradition, and it's very powerful. And the world needs it right now, because it's kind of lost, doesn't really know which end is up, but there are a lot of people who really want to know what that is, and this group can help provide that. So that's what I believe in, and I really look forward to the group growing and stepping up and being of service in the world.
Yeah, I really hope that we can meet the challenge, and I'm positive we can. I know we can. We just have to just do it, like Nike, right? Just do it. Yeah. So, once again, I just want to say thank you for taking the time out of your day to speak with me and give our listeners something to think about. And I always appreciate it, Michael. And you're just an incredible guy. So,
well, really thanks, John, and it's really an honor for me. It's a pleasure to be able to to be in this conversation, because it's really something that we keep it alive by talking about it and finding ways to support each other and trying to live it.
Right.
So yeah, I really appreciate you calling me and for having me as a member there in the group. It's very important to me, and I love it.
Right on, man. So
okay.
I'll let you get some rest, and we're gonna go ahead and end the interview. And it's just been a blast. So hopefully we can talk again. Well, I know I'll talk to you soon, but hopefully we can have you do another interview at some time if you're interested.
Well, great. Yeah, I look forward to it.
All right, Michael.
Take care, John.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.